Late Sunday night, an Israeli airstrike killed 5 Al Jazeera journalists, as well as a 6th journalist who was sheltering nearby and a passerby who were all living in tents within the complex of the Al Shifa hospital in Gaza City. Israel has claimed responsibility for the strike, saying it was deliberately targeting Anas Al Sharif, who's one of the most prominent voices and faces of Al Jazeera Network covering northern Gaza. Israel claimed that he was a militant involved in coordinating rocket attacks, despite the fact that rights groups, including the Committee to Protect Journalists, have said there's no credible evidence to show that. Anas Al Sharif was an extremely prominent face on Al Jazeera, and he was reporting every single day the devastating humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the impact of Israel's unprecedented bombardment on civilians, particularly in the north of the Strip. I spoke to eyewitnesses who were there at the scene. They described absolute horror. They said that the journalists were getting ready to go to sleep, and effectively this airstrike targeted directly the tent that Anas, fellow journalist, and 3 camera operators, all working for Al Jazeera, were sleeping in. The shrapnel then spread to a neighbouring tent, impacting another journalist who's unrelated to Al Jazeera and killing a passerby. One man we spoke to described how one of the journalists was still alive but on fire, another one was headless, and Anas himself was covered in blood and lying on the ground. The video footage from the scene is incredibly galling. But this is not an isolated incident. In fact, in the weeks prior to Anas's killing, the Committee to Protect Journalists and the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression both raised their alarm about what they said was a smear campaign from the Israeli military, calling Anas a militant, even though he was a journalist. And they actually said in the weeks leading up to his killing that he was at risk of being hit by an airstrike, a targeted airstrike. Anas himself had expressed concerns that he might be assassinated by the Israeli military. Shortly after his death, his fellow journalist posted a message that Anas had actually penned before he was killed, fearing that the worst might happen, where he basically said it was his last will and testament, and he asked the world not to forget Gaza. But there's deep concerns for the targeting of Palestinian journalists. According to Reporters Without Borders, more than 200 journalists and media workers have been killed in Israeli strikes. In fact, Gaza is the most deadly place on the planet to be a journalist. And at the same time, Israel is not allowing foreign journalists into Gaza unless on controlled military embeds. So we rely entirely on our Palestinian colleagues who are living the bombardment every day and the hunger crisis under Israel's blockade and the threat of being targeted by the Israeli military. This is also of deep concern because Benjamin Netanyahu has just announced an expanded offensive where he'll be pushed into the last bits of besieged Gaza, starting with Gaza's Strip, which is where Anas Al Sharif and his colleagues were based and where they were reporting from. The concern is in the coming days there'll be more evacuation orders, civilians will be forced to move south, and a major operation will begin, and there won't be journalists on the ground to be able to document that in real time.